Inside the executive boardroom on the 42nd floor, where power is sealed with handshakes and financial charts, a woman in a gray janitor's uniform suddenly puts down her mop, stands tall, removes her worn headscarf, and slowly swaps her glasses. The very people who once deemed her invisible are left speechless as they realize the quiet cleaning woman who mopped the floors every night for the past 2 weeks is none other than Elena Carter, the new Chief Executive Officer of Hartley Dynamics. And she's not here to apologize. She's here to expose those who belittled, abused, and manipulated an empire from the shadows. I was drenched with cold water. I was slapped in a boardroom. I was called trash. But today, I stand here with the truth, the evidence, and the power to cleanse everything that's rotted from within. The story you're about to hear isn't just the rise of a future CEO, it's a secret investigation, a daring disguise, and the most stunning corporate takedown ever seen. If you believe every person deserves respect no matter what job they do, like, share, and subscribe now to follow this true story to the end. Welcome to The Invisible One, the journey from basement to boardroom. The air in the room froze with humiliation. "Don't you ever talk back to me, Douglas?" The white man growled, his voice low and sharp like a blade. "You are nothing here. Clean this room right now, or don't bother showing your face tomorrow, sir. The floor has already been thoroughly cleaned several times." Elena, the black woman in a janitor's uniform, replied calmly. But without another word, Douglas grabbed a full glass of water and poured it straight onto Elena. The icy water splashed onto her hair, streamed down her face, soaked through her thin shirt, drenched her body, and formed a puddle at her feet on the freshly cleaned floor. The cold made Elena gasp, but it was the deliberate cruelty of the act that truly took her breath away. "Now you've got something real to do," Douglas muttered smugly. He had no idea that the woman he just humiliated wasn't just a janitor, but someone powerful enough to destroy his entire career with a single meeting. The executive floor of Hartley Dynamics gleamed under cold fluorescent lights. In a simple maintenance uniform, Elena Carter silently pushed a mop down the hallway, her name tag reading Jody, not the name once revered by many in the tech world. The hands that once signed multi-million-dollar deals were now red and swollen from industrial cleaning chemicals. The sound of expensive leather shoes echoed behind her. Douglas Miller, the operations manager, approached with a stack of documents in hand. He was the kind of man who had never once looked Elena in the eyes when she was the executive vice president. Her eyes, usually sharp and confident in the boardroom, now flickered with rage. Her jaw clenched as she bent down to pick up the now soaked papers he had dropped. Every cell in her body wanted to rise up, tear off the disguise, reveal her identity, and fire him on the spot. But that wasn't why she was here. Not yet. Elena Carter, 28 years old, had graduated top of her class from Princeton Business School and was featured in Forbes 30 Under 30 for her breakthroughs in sustainable technology. Hartley Dynamics wasn't just any company. It was founded by her father, Thomas Carter, 35 years ago in his garage with only $2,000 borrowed from her grandmother. Today, it was a fintech empire worth over $5 billion. Thomas, now 60, was one of the few successful black CEOs in Silicon Valley. His two guiding principles were innovation and integrity. But lately, his skin had grown paler. His once hearty laugh faded 6 months ago. A sudden heart attack had jolted the entire Carter family. The doctors were clear he needed rest. Succession planning, once a later conversation, suddenly became urgent, and Elena, His only child, groomed for the role since graduation, was the obvious candidate. However, Thomas still had lingering concerns. One quiet evening at his modern home, perched atop Lincoln Heights, overlooking the entire city, he said to her, "Elena, I couldn't be prouder of what you've accomplished." His voice was warm and firm, the same tone that had inspired thousands of employees throughout his career. "You have a brilliant business mind and solid technical knowledge, but what worries me is what you've never known." Elena set down her fork, frowning. "What do you mean?" Thomas sighed as if the weight of legacy rested on his shoulders. "You've never been on the front lines. You've never seen how the company operates from the lowest level. You've never been treated like someone without a title or a corner office." Elena was about to protest, but he raised a hand to stop her. "When I started this company, I was the janitor, the accountant, the salesperson, and the engineer. All in one, I knew every corner. That's something no financial report can show you." His gaze, identical to Elena's, was steady and full of concern. "Lately, I've been hearing things, that the company culture is nothing like what we once dreamed. But in front of me or the family, everyone puts on a good act. I don't believe you can lead effectively without truly understanding what's going on." The challenge hung in the air between them, and as always, Elena never turned down a challenge. "So, what do you want me to do?" Their plan that night was bold. Elena Carter would go undercover as a night shift janitor for 2 weeks. No privileges, no exceptions, no revealing her identity. She would live and work like the thousands of workers at Hartley Dynamics, starting from the very bottom of the corporate ladder. The transformation was complete. Designer clothes were replaced by worn-out workwear. Her usually straightened hair returned to its natural curls tied back in a headscarf. The perfect manicure was gone along with her signature makeup. Contact lenses replaced her recognizable branded glasses. The diamond earrings were swapped for cheap metal hoops. Thus, Jody, the nameless janitor, was born. Thomas Carter arranged for his daughter to be hired through the third-party cleaning company, Bright Pro Services, ensuring no one in HR would recognize her. Her paperwork, background check, and onboarding were all handled discreetly. The mission was clear. Elena had 2 weeks to discover whether her father's company still held true to its original values or had rotted from the inside. She had no idea those 2 weeks would forever change how she saw the company and the world. The next day, Jody fidgeted with the oversized uniform shirt as she waited for her first shift to begin. Her bare hands kept playing with the unfamiliar employee badge pinned to her chest. Her shift started at 10 p.m. After most executives had left the building, the orientation was rushed. Just a quick tour of cleaning rules, safety warnings, and a blunt reminder. Stealing will result in immediate termination and possibly criminal charges. The supervisor didn't even bother looking at her once as he handed her a ring of keys and a checklist of cleaning zones. For most of her life, Elena Carter had been the center of attention, the daughter of Thomas Carter, the executive vice president, the inspirational figure. When she walked into a room, people stood, made eye contact, even stepped aside to make room. But Jody the janitor was invisible, like a shadow. Managers walked past her as if she didn't exist. They bumped into her cart without apologizing. Some even continued discussing confidential documents without caring that she was emptying the trash behind them. By the end of her first day, Elena had blisters on her palms and had learned how to move with less effort. But more than that, she began to notice a clear pattern in how senior staff treated janitorial workers. Elena Carter, who once thought she knew the company inside and out, was now seeing a completely different Hartley dynamics. From the lowest vantage point, most of the managers had already left the building by the time the final orientation ended. Brief cold. It was merely a quick walkthrough of cleaning protocols, a few safety guidelines, and a stern warning. Any theft will result in immediate termination and possible criminal prosecution. The supervisor didn't even bother to look at her once as he handed her a ring of keys and the task list. Throughout her career, Elena Carter had always stood out in every space, whether as the daughter of Thomas Carter, a prestigious Princeton alumna, or the executive vice president of one of America's top fintech companies. Wherever she went, she was greeted with eye contact, words, and recognition. But in the role of Jody, a brand new janitor at Hartley Dynamics, she was no different from a ghost. Managers walked past her as if she were invisible. One even rammed into her cart without so much as an apology. When she entered an occupied office to empty trash bins, no one paused. They continued casually discussing strategies, financial reports, or confidential information as if no one else was present in the room. By the end of the first day, her once soft hands had already begun to blister. She learned how to move like someone with no right to feel tired, saving every ounce of energy to survive the night shift. And she began to see clearly the way employees treated the cleaning staff. Each passing day revealed a new layer of Hartley Dynamics culture, a picture she had never seen before. Even as a senior executive, the glossy company her father had built with blood, sweat, and integrity from the ground up looked entirely different when viewed from the bottom, looking up. At the start of day 2, Elena, still in the role of Jody, began adjusting to the physical toll of her new job. The muscle aches from the previous day had faded into a dull throb. The blisters on her hands were hardening into calluses. She had learned how to shift her weight when mopping to ease the strain on her back. But no amount of physical training could prepare her for the psychological battle that Douglas Miller, the operations manager, was about to unleash. At 45, Douglas was the kind of man who had clawed his way up through sheer stubbornness and grit regardless of who had to suffer along his climb to the top. His shirts were always perfectly pressed, his hair slick and not a strand out of place. His premium leather briefcase tucked under one arm like a symbol of power. In front of the leadership team, Douglas was the embodiment of dedication and efficiency. But when dealing with the cleaning crew, especially newcomers, he was a nightmare. He often conducted surprise mid-shift inspections, nitpicking even the tiniest faults to berate the staff. During one early week inspection, Douglas pointed out a glove with faint dust smudges. He had wiped off a ceiling vent cover a section that was only scheduled for quarterly cleaning. This company represents excellence. Everything must be flawless, he declared. Then he ordered the entire east wing of the 3rd floor to be cleaned again, forcing the janitorial team to stay 2 extra unpaid hours. Maria, a veteran employee, tried to explain that the vent was not part of the nightly routine, but Douglas cut her off immediately. If I want excuses, I'll ask. What I want is competence, something that seems to be lacking around here. If he was harsh to the group, Douglas seemed to reserve a special kind of hostility for Elena. Maybe because she was new. Maybe because despite her efforts to hide it, something about her demeanor didn't quite fit the image of a janitor. That quiet confidence irked him as if it were a silent challenge. No matter how spotless her work was, he found fault. Glass with streaks only visible at certain angles under light. A carpet with a few strands of lint barely visible to the naked eye. Stainless steel surfaces he claimed bore fingerprints. During her first shift cleaning the executive floor restrooms, Douglas appeared unannounced. Without waiting for her to finish, he began inspecting, criticizing her technique. The cleaning products she used, even the way she organized her cart. "Do you really not know how to do this? Or are you just pretending?" His voice rang loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "We should hire robots instead. At least they know how to follow orders." Elena clenched her jaw, swallowing the wave of humiliation. In her role as a leader, a single email would have been enough to get him fired. But now she was just Jody, a janitor without a voice. All she could do was nod, apologize, and promise to do better. Other janitors had begun noticing the special attention Douglas gave. Jody Howard, an older man who had worked there for over a decade, quietly pulled her aside after one instance where she was left trembling from a 20-minute scolding. "You should steer clear of him," Howard whispered, eyes darting to check if anyone was listening. "That guy never lets anyone be, especially those he thinks are weak." Then it happened on Thursday night, her fourth working day. She was mopping the hallway in front of the main executive meeting room. Her cart was neatly tucked to the side, not blocking any path. 11:30 p.m. The office was nearly empty. She had just replaced the mop water when she heard the distinct sound of leather shoes, Douglas's unmistakable footsteps. He slowed as he approached her. His eyes scanned the floor, clearly searching for flaws, and then, suddenly, without warning, he swung his arm and deliberately knocked over the neatly arranged cart. The crash echoed down the hallway. Bottles clattered and rolled. Douglas paused for a beat, glanced at the chaos he had caused with a barely there smirk, and then walked right through the spilled water, leaving dirty footprints across the tile Elena had spent an hour scrubbing. Clean. No words. No apology. Not even a glance. As if she didn't exist, Elena stood frozen, staring at the mess before her. In that moment, something inside her broke. This was no longer just an experiment to understand the company. This was a battle for justice. This was no longer about disrespect or invisibility. This was calculated cruelty. A cold, deliberate abuse of power carried out with the confidence that there would be no consequences. As Elena Carter knelt down to clean up the mess Douglas Miller had purposefully created, tears of fury welled up at the corners of her eyes, but she held them back, refusing to let a single drop fall. At the start, she thought this was simply a way to understand the company from the inside. But now, after many nights of witnessing and experiencing quiet oppression, she realized this was no longer a personal mission. This was justice for the people who silently kept Hartley Dynamics running. Those who had once helped her father lay the very foundation of an empire. As Douglas's racially charged cruelty escalated in the days that followed, Elena was ready. She documented everything time-date witnesses, every offensive word she quietly observed, which managers enabled the behavior and which ones stood silently by even if they didn't agree. Each piece came together into a full picture, a silent indictment carefully assembled by Jody, the invisible janitor. One evening, Douglas returned following the cart-toppling incident. "You think you're clever, don't you?" he hissed, stepping in close. Elena didn't respond, knowing that anything she said would only make things worse. She quietly gathered the spilled items, planning to move on to the next office on her cleaning list to avoid a confrontation. "I'm talking to you," he barked. The proper response when your superior speaks is "yes, sir," or "no, sir." Where were you raised that they taught you this kind of disrespect? "Yes, sir. I'm sorry. Elena replied, each word bitter and heavy in her throat. She had just started mopping the hallway outside the executive boardroom when Douglas deliberately stepped onto the freshly cleaned area, leaving dirty footprints behind. "This floor's still filthy," he shouted as if addressing an auditorium, though there were only 2 people in the hallway. "Can't you see these stains? Can you do anything right?" Elena glanced down. The floor was gleaming, save for the footprints Douglas had just created himself. "There were no other marks," she responded calmly. "I just cleaned it, sir. It was completely clean and dry before that." "You're arguing with me now." Douglas, cutting his voice lowering, but becoming far more dangerous. "You think you know Hartley Dynamics cleaning standards better than I do. Let me show you your real place." Without another word, he grabbed a full glass of water from a nearby table and dumped it over her head. The freezing water ran from her hair down her face, through her now-soaked shirt, pouring onto the floor she had carefully cleaned just moments ago. Elena gasped, not from the cold, but from the ruthless intent behind the act. "Now you have something real to clean," he said, his voice eerily even. He dropped the empty glass onto the floor and walked away without so much as a glance back. "Don't even think about leaving until you're dry and the floor is spotless. I'll be personally inspecting it before your shift ends." Elena stood frozen in place. Water dripped from her hair to her clothes down to the floor, forming small puddles around her feet. The humiliation ran deeper than any anger she had ever felt. In that moment, she was no longer Elena Carter, the prestigious Princeton graduate, the talented vice president. She was no longer Jody, the invisible janitor, either. She was simply a human being, stripped of dignity by a man who believed he'd never have to answer for it. She bent down and began to mop the floor again. Her soaked uniform clung to her body cold and heavy. But her mind burned not with rage anymore, but with resolve. Douglas Miller would pay, not just for what he did to her, but for the fear and shame he inflicted on an entire group of forgotten workers in this company. If you think Douglas was the only problem, you're wrong. Elena soon discovered there was someone else, Travis Nolan, the marketing director at Hartley Dynamics, whose outward appearance starkly contrasted his true nature. At 42, Travis always appeared in perfectly tailored suits, trendy eyeglasses, neatly styled hair, and a cool, faint smile. He crafted the image of a modern, creative, successful, yet approachable Elena. First encountered Travis during her second week undercover. His office was on the cleaning schedule that night. According to the list, it should have taken around 20 minutes. But she ended up spending over 3 hours there, causing a backlog in her other assignments that shift. She entered the office around 10 p.m. Travis was still at his computer typing as if entranced. Unlike many managers who ignored the cleaning crew, Travis spoke up immediately. "Oh, great. This place is a mess. We had a brainstorming session today, so it needs a deep clean." With her now trained eye, Elena quickly assessed that the room was far from a disaster. Just a few coffee cups on a side table and some neatly stacked papers. Still, she nodded and began by emptying the trash. Travis watched her every movement for minutes, his gaze shifting from his screen to her repeatedly. As she was cleaning the glass table, he suddenly stood up, adopting an instructive tone. "You're cleaning that wrong. Never go side to side, clean in circles, or you'll leave streaks." He moved in close, pointing to tiny corners, highlighting imaginary smudges, and rattling off cleaning tips like someone with a degree in sanitation. After she had wiped down every surface, vacuumed the carpet, and disinfected all touch points according to protocol, Travis began his inspection. He rubbed his hand along the desk, sniffed the air, peered into crevices like he was hunting for faults. "This won't do," he said, faking disappointment. "The glass is still foggy, the carpet's still dusty, and did you even clean the picture frames? Probably not start over. Do it right." Elena looked around the nearly immaculate room in disbelief. She knew exactly what this was, a test of power. But as Jody, she had no other choice. "Yes, sir," she said softly and started all over again for the second time. The second time around, she was even more meticulous, paying attention to every corner as if she were being tested. Every movement was calculated to avoid scrutiny. Once she finished, Travis performed his usual quality inspection ritual. But this time he pointed out completely new issues. "There's still dust along the baseboards and my desk isn't properly organized," he said, even though she had been clearly instructed not to touch any personal items or papers. "What's that smell? Did you use the wrong cleaning product? This room should smell clean." "Not like chemicals," the cycle repeated. A third time he pointed out even more trivial reasons. By the time Travis Nolan was finally satisfied and left his office, the clock had passed midnight. Elena was now seriously behind on cleaning the remaining areas. It didn't take long for her to realize this behavior wasn't an exception. It was the norm. Travis always found a way to nitpick, fabricate faults, and force janitorial staff to redo their work. He would often place his coffee cup precariously on the edge of the trash can so it would tip over when emptied. Once he even scattered paper clips across a freshly vacuumed carpet, only to complain that the cleaning quality is terrible. After the water dumping incident with Douglas Miller, Elena decided to find out whether Hartley Dynamics' HR department truly protected workers' rights the way they claimed to. The head of Human Resources was Madeline Knox, a woman in her 40s, always wearing a gentle smile and modestly professional clothing. Her photo appeared on bulletin boards throughout the building with the phrase, "My door is always open. Your voice matters." Her office door bore a label that read "Safe Space" in rounded, friendly font. During her lunch break the day after the Douglas incident, Elena decided to enter Madeline's office. She was greeted with a warm smile, offered a seat, and even served coffee from a personal espresso machine. "How can I help you?" Madeline asked, her voice soft and encouraging. "I don't think we've met before. You must be new to the cleaning team. Right, Elena, adopting the right amount of timidity to remain in character, as Jody recounted the entire incident, the public humiliation, the water dumping, the ongoing abuse of power. She delivered her report in a steady, emotionless voice, exactly how she used to advise her own employees to speak when reporting workplace misconduct. Madeline tilted her head attentively, her face holding the same empathetic expression throughout. When Elena finished, Madeline sighed and held her hand as if sharing in her pain. "First, I want to thank you for speaking up." She began her tone, shifting into a slow scripted cadence like reading from an HR handbook. "We genuinely value all reports of workplace misconduct." But then her tone subtly changed. Still gentle, but now noticeably more dismissive. "Perhaps there's been a bit of misunderstanding about roles within the organizational system. In a company like this, there will always be certain differences between positions. A quiet but unmistakable denial. You're not an important employee. Your dignity, at least in their eyes, didn't warrant concern." Elena stood up and politely thanked her. Madeline added one final piece of advice, lowering her voice slightly, as if sharing a secret. "Just between us. Douglas is very particular about cleaning standards. His communication style can be a bit direct. I think it's best if you focus on meeting the requirements rather than getting too caught up in the rest. In the corporate world, having thick skin is a valuable asset. Elena nodded and left the office. The safe space sign on the door felt like a cruel joke. What Madeline didn't know was that Elena had secretly recorded the entire conversation. It would serve as key evidence of how the system failed to protect its most vulnerable. If what Douglas and Travis did could be called silent abuse and power misused behind closed doors, what came next with Veronica Lane, the vice president of sales, was the most brutal proof that this abuse had seeped into dangerous depths. Veronica was an icon at Hartley Dynamics. At 45, she was not only a revenue-generating powerhouse, but also a headliner at packed industry seminars, a fierce negotiator who had helped the company dominate major market shares in fintech. She had it all: authority, influence, and the habit of never being challenged. On Friday night, during the third week of Elena's undercover mission, she was assigned to clean the executive boardroom on the 38th floor. As she pushed the cleaning cart into the hallway, a sharp voice pierced the air. "Where do you think you're going?" Elena startled and turned around. It was Veronica. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm scheduled to clean this room at 9 p.m. I can come back after your meeting is over." Her reply was polite, professional, and in any normal work environment the matter would have ended there. But Veronica Lane didn't live in a normal world. "You dare interrupt my meeting," she nearly screamed, stepping toward Elena. "Do I have to waste my precious time teaching you basic manners for people who clean toilets?" The words echoed through the room. Behind the glass walls, employees in nearby offices paused, watching, but no one stepped in. They saw it happen, but they returned to their screens, their phones, or simply looked away. Elena had endured cold water from Douglas' psychological torment from Travis. But this comment from Veronica crossed the line. Maybe it was because that insult struck at the very injustice she had witnessed over the last 3 weeks. Or maybe it was the unbearable truth that not a single person, just one, had the courage to speak up. Being scolded simply for following the assigned cleaning schedule was already unfair. But it was Veronica Lane's blatant insult that awakened something inside Elena Carter. Not the part of her that was Jody, the lowly janitor, but the core of a true leader. She lifted her head, her voice calm but firm. "With all due respect, ma'am, I'm simply following the protocol approved by facilities management. If there's a schedule change, the policy requires prior notice, so we can adjust accordingly. I'm just doing my job, just like you're doing yours." The boardroom fell into complete silence. The young sales staff sat frozen, stunned that a janitor dared to speak back to Veronica like that. Even Veronica paused for a few seconds, her eyes flashing with a mix of shock and fury. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone she deemed invisible. That silence lasted only a moment before Veronica's face twisted in rage. Without warning, she raised her hand and slapped Elena hard across the face. The slap cracked loudly through the quiet boardroom. The blow was so strong that Elena stumbled sideways, hitting her back against the cleaning cart behind her. "Shut your filthy mouth, you trash!" Veronica snarled, her voice low and dangerous. "You're nothing here. Clean this room now or don't come back to work." Pain spread across Elena's left cheek, but what truly stunned her was the sheer shock. In all her years, climbing the corporate world through Princeton high-level summits and strategy meetings, she had never witnessed physical violence, let alone been the victim of it. The young employees who witnessed the scene dropped their eyes, focusing on laptops, phones, or the ceiling, anywhere but Elena's gaze. No one stood up. No one said a word in protest. No one offered a helping hand. That collective silence was its own form of violence. A silent message: stay quiet to keep your seat. In that moment, Elena nearly broke her cover. Just one sentence, and she could have exposed Veronica and ended the woman's career on the spot. But some deeply honed instinct held her back. She bowed her head, whispered an apology, and resumed cleaning the chairs, the tables, the floor as if nothing had happened. The red mark still burned on Elena's cheek, but her mind had never been clearer. This was the final line. Not because the slap hurt more than Douglas's ice-cold water or the constant psychological torment from Travis, but because that slap was the period at the end of a sentence full of unchecked abuse. Hartley Dynamics. The company her father had built on the foundations of respect and human dignity had become a place where someone could be assaulted in broad daylight in a boardroom and no one would speak up. She kept cleaning, mechanical, and silent as the sales team resumed their conversations as if nothing had happened. But inside her, a new vow had been made. This was no longer a mission to observe company culture. This was an evidence-gathering operation for the deepest reform in Hartley Dynamics history. From that night on, Elena began documenting every event in detail, every insult, every act of misconduct by leadership. She recorded names, dates, locations, and witnesses. Thanks to her trusty janitor's cart. No one questioned her placing a tiny camera in the cleaning supply bin or hiding a voice recorder among the bottles of floor cleaner. The phone in her pocket, always on silent, helped her capture photos of abandoned documents, unlocked emails, and internal reports revealing ugly truths. As the evidence piled up, she discovered that the three people who had made her life miserable as Jody Douglas Travis and Veronica were not only tyrannical, but criminal. They had been secretly redirecting funds from employee welfare accounts into their own personal ones. It didn't stop there. They were also selling internal company data to competitors, all in an effort to pressure Thomas Carter, her father, into early resignation. All the documents, images, and recordings were clear and irrefutable. But, as the 2-week undercover deadline neared, Elena faced a critical decision. If she simply presented the evidence to her father, the scheme could be shut down immediately. But that wouldn't address the root of the problem. The toxic culture that had taken deep root in the system. A public move could damage the company's reputation, affecting hundreds of innocent employees. Elena knew she needed a smarter plan. A reveal that was public enough, strategic enough, without causing unnecessary collateral damage. On Friday night, after her final shift, Elena began preparing for the endgame. She left the company headquarters, made sure she wasn't being followed, and walked several blocks to a public restroom. There, she changed back into her real identity. The headscarf was removed. Her natural curls were brushed smooth and styled with professional-grade gel. She put on her designer glasses again, applied light makeup, returning to the image of Elena Carter, Executive Vice President of Hartley Dynamics. Then she caught a ride to her father's modern villa nestled in the upscale neighborhood of Westwood Heights, overlooking the gleaming glass tower, the headquarters they had built together. She didn't come in anger. She came with a mission to take the first step in a company-wide cleansing with her father, the founder being the first person who needed to know the truth. Just hours ago, Elena Carter had still been scrubbing the floors of a company that ran through her veins and fueled her deepest convictions. Now, she stood before her father, Thomas Carter, the founder of Hartley Dynamics. In the study of his modern Westwood Heights villa, the physical distance between this home and the company's headquarters could be measured in miles. But the psychological distance she had traveled after a month undercover felt like a whole different world. Thomas sat waiting in his study. His eyes darkened when he saw his daughter's face. "You look exhausted," he said softly, concern filling his voice. "It's not just physical, Dad," Elena replied, her voice low. "I'm drained by what I've witnessed." Over the next 3 hours, she laid out every detail she had gathered: recordings, videos, emails, financial statements, all clear evidence of abuse of power, internal manipulation, and corruption within Hartley Dynamics. When she played the video of Veronica Lane slapping Jody in the boardroom, Thomas's fists clenched in fury. When the recording of Douglas Miller pouring water over her played, his jaw tightened. He said nothing throughout the presentation, but his eyes revealed deep disappointment. "They've betrayed every value this company was built on," Thomas said, his voice heavy as if speaking to himself. "Everything I believed in, everything I worked so hard to build." Elena nodded, knowing this wasn't just the hurt of a father seeing his daughter mistreated, but the pain of a founder watching his life's work be disgraced. "The question now is," she said, "what do we do to fix this? Not just put out fires, but create real change." Father and daughter spent the entire night planning. They agreed the only way to make a lasting impact was to expose all wrongdoing in front of the entire executive team. Board of directors and shareholders. Thomas would call an emergency meeting for Monday morning. Every senior leader would be required to attend, including Douglas Miller, Madeline Knox, Travis Nolan, Marcus Evans, and Veronica Lane, the 5 key figures in the scheme to undermine the company. The board would be notified of a serious matter, but given no details. The less they knew, the more genuine their reactions would be. And, most importantly, Elena would remain in the role of Jody until the final moment. One last performance. One final night of enduring disregard. But afterward, there would be justice. Before parting, Thomas embraced her tightly. "I thought this experience would teach you about leadership," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But it turns out you're the one teaching me." Monday morning dawned with clear skies. Sunlight reflected off the glass panels of Hartley Tower, the place where truth was about to surface. Elena, dressed in Jody's gray uniform, pushed her janitor's cart toward the 42nd floor, the company's highest executive boardroom. She had arranged to be assigned to clean this very room just before the emergency meeting at 10 a.m. At 8:30. Executives began to trickle in, unaware that today would be a turning point in their careers, or possibly their last day. Elena quietly wiped tables and mopped floors as she had for hundreds of nights before. Douglas Miller was the first to enter the boardroom. His face twisted with annoyance when he saw her. "What are you doing here? This room needs to be spotless. I'll be checking for every speck of dust." "Got it?" "Yes, sir. I'll have it ready before the meeting," Elena replied, maintaining the familiar deferential tone. "If there's a single fingerprint left, you're gone. I'll make sure of it by 9:45. Directors and board members were gathered outside the room. Most wore curious expressions. A few seemed uneasy. No one knew the reason for the emergency meeting. Thomas Carter was the last to enter. He offered only a nod in greeting. His eyes passed over Elena, who was still wiping near the door with a discreet but warm glance. At 9:55, Douglas returned for his final inspection. He ran a finger along the window ledge, looked down at his fingertip, and found nothing. "You did a terrible job," he still said loudly. "There are fingerprints on the glass. The table isn't polished enough. Like I said, if I find even a speck of dust, you're out of a job today." "Yes, sir. I'll take care of it," Elena replied, raising her cloth again, even though everything was already spotless. At exactly 10 Soondrars, Thomas Carter stood up. His voice, instead of walking out as Douglas Miller had ordered, Elena Carter calmly set the mop aside and leaned against the glass wall. She stood tall, took a deep breath, then turned around, facing the entire leadership team seated around the oval meeting table. Her demeanor was no longer that of Jody, the humble cleaning woman, but of a true leader. She looked Douglas straight in the eyes and spoke with a clear, resolute voice. "Actually, I believe I should stay. Douglas." Her tone was firm but not harsh, carrying the natural confidence that belonged not to Jody but to Elena Carter. She continued, each movement deliberate. She removed the headscarf, revealing carefully styled curls. She took off the cheap glasses and replaced them with a designer pair from her jacket pocket. Finally, she unzipped the gray uniform, revealing underneath a crisp white blouse and a tailored blazer. The room froze. Eyes shifted from surprise to shock. They had sat in meetings with her, reported to her, debated strategy with her, yet simply because of a uniform and a lowly role, not a single one had recognized Elena Carter as Jody, because to them, a janitor wasn't worth looking at closely. "Allow me to introduce myself," she said calmly. "I'm Elena Carter, the new Chief Executive Officer of Hartley Dynamics." The legally appointed successor by Thomas Carter silence engulfed the room. Mouths hung open in disbelief. Without giving them time to react, Elena pulled a remote from her jacket pocket and changed the slide on the projector screen. "For the past 2 weeks, I've been documenting the toxic culture silently corroding our company, something entirely contrary to the values Hartley Dynamics once stood for." The screen displayed a video of Douglas Miller dumping a full glass of cold water over Jody. The security footage captured everything. Faces, voices, timestamps, undeniable. Douglas's face turned from flushed red to pale white. He tried to defend himself weakly. She was being disrespectful and just. Pouring water on an employee is assault. "Douglas, there is no context where that's acceptable." Elena interrupted, her tone icy. She clicked again. This time footage of Travis Nolan forcing Jody to repeatedly clean the same area played. He nitpicked irrational details, applying pressure, turning cleaning into torment. This is how the director of marketing spends his time not innovating, but controlling and abusing the lowest-ranking employees. Travis flushed red, opening his mouth, but she advanced to the next piece of evidence, allowing no interruption. Several board members began scribbling notes frantically. An older man removed his glasses and wiped them with a cloth as if clearer lenses might change what was on screen. But no, the truth was crystal clear. Finally, Veronica Lane spoke up, her instinct as a seasoned executive kicking in. "This is blatant distortion. The video has been edited, intentionally manipulated." Elena didn't respond with words. She clicked again, this time showing footage from another camera angle. Veronica slapping Jody with horrified employees watching nearby. Elena looked her directly in the eye. "Would you like me to play the audio as well? Your exact words were, 'You are nothing. Clean it up or get out.'" Veronica fell silent. Her arrogance vanished. The image of a powerful woman was now just a fractured shell. As the presentation ended, the entire atmosphere in the boardroom had shifted. All former smugness, every condescending glance had evaporated, replaced by panic fear and the frantic mental math of self-preservation. Douglas was the first to speak, his voice cracking. "I thought you were just a cleaner, I'm sorry. Please don't let me lose my job." The door opened. 2 security officers entered, standing behind him. "Mr. Miller, we've been instructed to escort you from the building immediately following this meeting." Douglas turned to Thomas Carter, eyes pleading. "I've given 30 years to this company, Thomas. You can't erase all that over a few incidents." Thomas stood for the first time since the meeting began and spoke. "It's precisely because of those 30 years that I'm this disappointed. You chose to use your power to oppress those beneath you instead of being an example of the values this company holds dear." Then he turned to address the entire executive team. "This investigation was carried out at my request as part of the succession plan. But even I didn't expect to uncover a level of toxicity this deep." As the tense meeting drew to a close, one by one, board members approached Elena Carter, the woman who had just shaken the entire room with her raw and unflinching exposé. Some congratulated her for the brilliant investigation. Others, visibly uneasy, offered apologies for having been complicit in their silence. Whether met with praise or regret, Elena remained composed and poised, the same calm that had helped her gather evidence during 2 intense weeks in disguise, and the same resolve that would guide her in steering Hartley Dynamics as its new leader. When the room was finally empty and only 2 people remained, Thomas Carter couldn't hide his emotion. He stepped forward and hugged his daughter tightly, overflowing with pride. "You've done something extraordinary," he whispered. "Not only did you expose the rot, but you understood exactly what needs to change at its root. I'm not sure I could have done that if I were in your place." Elena's eyes unexpectedly stung, not from remembering the humiliation, but from knowing just how profoundly the experience had changed her leadership perspective. Thomas nodded. "After today, the board has agreed to expedite the transition. They believe you're ready." Elena looked out the large window on the 42nd floor, where the city lights were just beginning to glow. The weight of what lay ahead felt as heavy as the sky, but she did not flinch. "I'm ready," she replied softly. "Not because I'm your daughter, not because of an Ivy League MBA. I'm ready because I've lived and witnessed this company from the lowest level up, and I know what works and what has to be torn down." She bent down and picked up the gray uniform she had worn every night, not to throw it away, but to fold it carefully like a treasured keepsake. "This uniform taught me more than any course I ever took at Harvard." On her way out of the boardroom, she paused by the janitor's cart that had accompanied her throughout the 2-week journey. "There's one thing I need to do before officially taking over," she said. The cultural reform of Hartley Dynamics didn't happen overnight. It was an ongoing process requiring honest confrontation persistence through silent resistance and the acceptance that perfection doesn't exist. Some who had benefited from the old system quietly pushed back. A few early changes were met with skepticism, but 6 months later the results began to speak for themselves. Turnover in lower-income departments dropped significantly. Employee satisfaction ratings rose. Internal initiatives increased, especially from departments that had once been seen as outsiders. For Elena, this journey wasn't just about restructuring a company, it was about rebuilding herself. She became stronger, more resilient, both physically and emotionally. The long nights of mopping floors, lowering her head, obeying orders being ignored, all had taught her the true value of dignity. In strategic meetings, she paid attention to who was often interrupted, who hadn't yet spoken. During department visits, she greeted every maintenance worker by name, just as she had once wished someone would do when she was Jody. Every decision she made was weighed from a holistic perspective, not only in terms of shareholder interests but also in how it affected the doorman, the night shift worker, or the new hire. No one remembered. 3 months after the fateful meeting, Thomas Carter formally announced his retirement. The entire company was invited to his farewell ceremony. In his final speech, he said, "I started this company in a rundown garage, but my proudest moment isn't the market cap. It's today handing over the reins to someone who climbed from the basement to the top floor on her own 2 feet." The entire room rose in thunderous applause. Elena stepped forward, not as a successor on paper, but as someone who had proven herself through sweat endurance and vision that reached far beyond any ivory tower. That night, after the spotlight had faded, she returned to the basement, the locker room of the cleaning staff. She opened her old locker and looked at the neatly folded, freshly washed cleaning uniform. She smiled. Hartley Dynamics wasn't just growing in financial reports, it had become a benchmark for corporate culture, now invited to share its transformation at international forums. And Elena Carter, the woman who was once drenched in cold water, once treated as invisible, was now a symbol of a new kind of leadership, not because she had a voice, but because she had once lived in silence. A gray uniform, a janitor's cart, a luxurious boardroom, and one woman who chose to walk into the shadows, to shine a light on the truth. Elena Carter didn't just become the CEO of Hartley Dynamics. She became the voice for those overlooked, silenced, and pushed to the margins. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to wield power with force. All she needed was courage, conviction, and a belief in justice. Because sometimes the biggest changes begin from the lowest floor in the building. I was once told I was nothing, but it was from that very place that I saw what no one at the top dared to face. This story isn't just about a woman unmasking her abusers. It's a powerful reminder that respect is not tied to a title, and dignity is not measured by rank. If this story moved you, like to empower those still suffering in silence. Share to help awaken more hearts. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that touch the soul and stir the spirit. We'll see you in the next journey where the ordinary becomes extraordinary.